Yes, we are live. So hello everyone, Carlos again. This is expert session here at the Evolve Commerce Club, expert session number 23. And today our guest is Nick Johnston, Johnston, co-founder of Bacho Gelato. They transformed a small gelato shop into a Brazilian empire with 185 locations and now also entering the US market. Last data I saw, on track for a billion uh, Brazilian reais in revenue. So Nick and his partner, they have redefined what it means to be a category leader. But before we speak about gelato and not ice creams, of course, that's very important. Nick, welcome.
Or
Thanks.
sorvete.
or sorbet. Nick, how about we start with the big picture? I'll make sure to keep you on track. And how did we end up here?
How long have we got? 30 minutes.
Go ahead.
So the bullet points are, I did a degree in business studies in Scotland in before I did a degree in business studies, I actually had a sabbatical year. And I sailed across the Atlantic, which was the beginning of the end, because that started Wanderlust. So I then went and did a degree in business studies, and each summer I would work in 5-star yachts in the south of France, in Monte Carlo, Cannes, Italian Riviera, and basically saw the lifestyles of the rich and famous, extremely demanding customers, absolute perfection, quality at any cost. It was literally, I want the best. It doesn't matter what it is. It's food, it's the driver, it's the chef, it's the boat, it's the beach, it's the restaurant. Everything had to be extremely high quality. And with that, you learn to figure out what's the whole experience. It's all sorts of things. So then I finished my degree with these interesting summers and decided I wasn't quite cut out to work in a 9-to-5 in a suit in an office in the Anglo-Saxon British environment with a fairly cold climate. It wasn't quite what I was looking for, but I didn't really know what I was looking for. So I got in my car and drove to Italy, where I had some friends from previous boats, and ended up working in a 5-star hotel, which was one of the leading hotels of the world, about an hour and a half north of Rome, where the immersion in experience, service, food and beverage, quality, the experience continued. And then one day, the captain of one of the boats I'd previously worked on turned up at the hotel and said, "How much are you earning and why are you here?" And I told him, and he said, "I'll pay you 3 times as much. We're going to the Caribbean in 3 weeks' time. Italian crew, Italian owner. You're going to continue learning Italian, but you'll be better fed, better paid, and there's no reason not to do it." And I knew yachts were a bit of an oasis, so I was a little bit scared that I might get sucked back into Cloud 9, which wasn't really reality and wasn't really a life. I mean, you get well paid, but you're also working extremely hard 7 days a week with very high demands. So I got sucked back into the world of yachting until one day a friend of mine said, "Oh, I've quit my job and I've offered you the position." And I said, "Well, if you quit, why on earth would I ever want to do that?" And he said, "Well, you're younger than me, you're quite adventurous, and I honestly think it's a perfect job for you." So he told me about the boat. It was an Italian owner who'd had a very big industry. They'd sold their industry for hundreds of millions of dollars in the late 80s and built a 46-meter offshore research vessel type private yacht to do around the world tour for what was supposed to be 7 years. So I joined that boat, loved the idea that somebody had actually got lots of resources and they didn't need to use the boat to sell anything. They didn't need to wine and dine people like Trump used to on Trump Princess in Cannes, and all these big moguls in Europe would hire boats and it was an extension of their life and they'd use it for business, and it was all part of the rich rat race. Instead, this Italian family said, "Well, we've made our money. We want to go and see the world, and we're going to invite just our best friends, and we're going to live on the boat 6 months a year." So I ended up working on that boat for 7 years. The chef on that boat was extremely good. He could have worked in any Michelin restaurant. And he made gelato pretty much every day there were guests on board. So there started the addiction with gelato. And he had very limited resources because we're on a boat that's very offshore. It's going from island to island in the middle of nowhere. And he had to use UHT milk. And despite this, it was still absolutely amazing. So after about 7 years on that boat, I said to the owners, look, I love you guys. I love the boat. I love the trip. It's amazing. But honestly, it's not my life. It's like a golden cage. And I think it's time for me to go and do something for myself. So I left the boat, went to Scotland. My sister and I had inherited an apartment. So I renovated the apartment, rewired, replumbed, all the decorations, and basically made a brand new apartment. And then one day out of the blue, this was sort of 6 months later, out of the blue, I get a phone call from the secretary of the Italian family who had the boat I worked on for 7 years. And she said, oh, they would like you to lunch on Tuesday next week at this restaurant in London. I said, okay, is that anything else? She said, no, here's your ticket and go and see them next week. So I met them for lunch in a nice fancy restaurant in Chelsea. And they introduced me to their architect, who was super famous, Peter Marino from New York, with a studio of 150 top architects. He does all the Chanel shops around the world. He was a friend of Andy Warhol. I mean, big name, big fashion, big price ticket. And so the Italian said, Nick, we'd like you to oversee the construction of a freestanding, or the renovation of a freestanding house in London. And I said, I don't know anything about air conditioning. And they said, that's why we're hiring you. I said, you're hiring me because I don't know anything about air conditioning? They said, no, we're hiring you because we trust you and we know you'll tell us exactly the way it is. So that was my pivot from first class food and beverage luxury experiences to trying to build very high-end houses, very high-tech and very expensive with extremely fine finishes. So I ended up building a house for them in London, and then that led on to another house in Milan, which ultimately led to another house in San Moritz. So that's where I got the background of project management, of building, of systems, of processes, of all that side of things. So then I got a phone call from a friend of mine, having sort of built these houses. A friend of mine said, aren't you ready for a sabbatical? I said, well, maybe. What's the suggestion? He said, well, I've bought a sailing boat and I'm going to sail to Australia from Spain. Wouldn't you like to come for a part of the trip? I said, wow, that sounds interesting. What are the options? He said, well, the first leg's from Spain down to Argentina. I said, oh, I've never been to South America. Yeah, that sounds fine. I'll do that. So we left Spain in November, 2 of us, sailed down to the Canaries, got a third crew member in the Canaries, sailed down to the Cape Verdes, and then 14 days across the Atlantic from the Cape Verdes to Fernando de Noronha. And we arrived in Fernando de Noronha at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 31st of December. And having never had, well, we hadn't had anything to drink for 2 weeks, because when you're on a boat, you have to be alert and you just don't drink on boats. It's just part of it. So we had, at lunchtime, we had our first ever caipirinha, which tasted very refreshing, didn't taste particularly strong. And I must admit, by midnight, I'd had probably too many caipirinhas. I thought I was in paradise. In fact, I was in paradise. And I decided, I think I'm going to stay here. This place is amazing. But nobody told me that the rest of Brazil's not quite the same as Fernando de Noronha. Mm-hmm. So anyway, this sailing trip carried on, and we sailed all the way down to Argentina, stopping all the way down the coast of Brazil. And one day I visited Sao Paulo, and it just struck me as an extremely unusual city from my perspective. I'd already been to New York, to Tokyo, to Los Angeles, to all kinds of big cities. But Sao Paulo had this immensity and size, and it just struck me that it was an interesting place. And the people in Brazil are extremely receptive. Some countries in Europe, if you don't speak the language perfectly, you're not particularly welcome. Brazil's the opposite. If you're a foreigner and you visit Brazil, because there's not a huge amount of international tourism, in general, people are extremely welcoming and they'll try to help you even if they can't understand. So I just was very impacted by Brazil and decided ultimately to move here. So about 6 months after being in Argentina, I did move to Brazil. As with many gringos, there was a Brazilian woman involved, and that was my motivation to come here. And I came to Brazil not really knowing what I was going to do. And for the first couple of years, it was kind of learn to swim so you don't sink and learn the language. Of course, I'd already lived in Italy for probably 7 years, so I spoke Italian, and Italian was fairly similar in certain contexts, so it helped with the understanding. So during that first few years, I did a renovation of a sobrado and various things. And then one day, the daughter of my ex-boss phoned me up and said, "Nick, are you looking for a project to do in Brazil?" I said, "I am actually." And she said, "Well, I've got some friends who've got a very interesting project. I'd like you to meet them." And I was going to be in Europe, so I met them. And I said to her, I said, "What's the project?" She said, "Oh, I don't really know how to explain it. I'll let them tell you." So I did meet one of the partners, Gigi, the brother, and he said, "What do you think about a 5-star, a top of the range gelato chain in Brazil?" I said, "I'm in." He said, "How can you say you're in?" I said, "Well, I've eaten a lot of gelato in my life. I've lived in Italy. I know what the upper quartile quality of gelato is. It's highly addictive. I've lived in Sao Paulo. At this time, it was for about 5 years. And Sao Paulo has a very vibrant food scene, lots of good restaurants, lots of good bars, lots of good music, not many good cafes. And at that time, I could think of 1 or 2 sorveterias. And so Gigi was quite surprised. He said, "Well, how can you possibly decide in 30 seconds that you're going to do it?"
Nick, you're on mute. I'm sorry, but you're on mute. Gustavo, is he mute as well for you? Hello? Yeah. So he probably dropped. Something happened. Let me just get him on WhatsApp to see what happened. Right. All right. Yeah. 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 But it's great. It's great. Yeah. He will be back in a sec, guys. He's about to return. He's about to come back. All right, Nick. Yeah. Please. Uh, yeah. Just join event. Join the event. All right, he's joining now. He's joining. Please stay with us. All right, welcome, Nick. Welcome. We missed you.
Welcome back. I speak so much I managed to crash the AirMeet server.
So you were saying,
So I was convinced it would work, and my future partner was quite surprised that I was instantly able to see the opportunity. But to me, it was a no-brainer because I knew what Italian gelato was. I'd lived in Brazil long enough to know that Brazilians have a sweet tooth, that there's lots of commercial places you could put a product, and we decided we'd do it. Then I met Eduardo and his dad. So Gigi, Eduardo, and the dad are the three Italian partners that I started with. And Eduardo and I, well, Eduardo came to Brazil and lived in my apartment, and the two of us set about where do you start with a brand new concept in a brand new country, in a brand new language, with a whole different set of laws, with, I mean, it was literally millions of things to solve between then and now. So our base thesis was, if Italy has 30, I think it was 34 or 36,000 gelaterias in the country with approximately 60 million people, and if in a city the size of Milan, Milan's about 2 million people, including all of the hinterland. So Greater Milan's 2 million people. And in Milan, there's 500 gelaterias or pontos di venda, like bars or cafes, that have a gelato fridge. So it's extremely common and extremely consumed. So our thesis was, well, Sao Paulo, if you count Greater Sao Paulo, ABC, Osasco, Guarulhos, Sao Paulo is more or less 20 million people. Let's say our target market was going to be 10%. We're 2 million people. 2 million people's Milan. Now, let's say that Brazilians don't know what gelato is. They don't like it. They don't eat it in the winter. Let's say they consume 10 times less than Milan. Instead of 500 points of sale, that's 50 points of sale. And our plan was, well, we want to open one really good gelateria with an Italian experience, distilling the best of Italy, the best things you could get on a holiday to Italy from a gelato point of view. So we tried to instill all of these experiences into one shop so that people would feel they'd just been to Italy for half an hour. And at that time, there wasn't anyone offering that experience in Brazil, which we thought was quite strange. So the numbers made sense, but we started building the shop in Oscar Freire, our first shop. From when we had the idea to when we actually opened the shop, about a year. So that included Edu coming to Brazil, setting up the company, finding the location, finding the constructor, building the brand, the logo, creating all the processes, finding all the equipment, finding all the suppliers. It was pretty non-stop. And one of the first wake-up calls for two gringos in Sao Paulo about to open their first shop was, we chose a constructor who had an amazing Excel spreadsheet, very detailed, very precise. Everything was very transparent, and it looked like this was going to be an amazing building experience, fast, efficient, and everything. So we signed the contract, and the agreement was, we're going to try and do this as quickly as possible because it's a commercial shop, paying rent already, on a busy street. Summer's about to arrive, so we'd hoped we could do it in 4 months, which we thought was realistic. But it would mean working at weekends as well. And so we signed the contract, started the build. I'm not going to mention the company name because they don't deserve any advertising. First weekend, no one's there. So we phone up the people that we'd done all the negotiation with and said, guys, we agreed we're going to try and do a fast commercial renovation and we want to open soon. Why is there no one here? We agreed to having people here at the weekend. They said, oh, you can fine us. And there was a fine in in the contract. So we thought, well, if there's a fine, they've got every motivation to do it quicker. But in fact, they couldn't care less. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for two gringos. So while the building's taking a bit longer than we thought it should, we got to meet some of the neighbors and the people walking their dogs, and they'd say, "What's this going to be?" And we say, "Gelateria." And they say, "What? Sorveteria?" I said, "Well, it's not actually a sorveteria, but it's similar."
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, there was all sorts of stories of doom and gloom because now nobody eats sorvete in the winter, and people sit at a common table, and two foreigners, you'll be out of business within the year, and oh, you're on the worst block of Oscar Freire. Lots of doom and gloom, which was probably more about them than us. But anyway, we did have some doubts during the building process if maybe we had just got it completely wrong. If it was such a good idea, how come no one had ever done it? Or people had done it, but they hadn't continued. So there was stories of lots of people who'd done gelato or sorvete in Sao Paulo. There was Soto Zero, which apparently had lots of queues. There was 2 or 3 shops, and then the quality dropped and the customers disappeared. Then there was Swenson's, and that had a boom for a period of time and disappeared. And then there was Parmalat, which apparently was extremely good, extremely busy, and then they had some problems in Italy, and it also disappeared. So we were a little bit insecure when we got to the final opening of the shop, and we were, maybe we got the prices wrong, maybe people won't like it, maybe people won't come, and we couldn't really explain why Argentina, which is further south and colder, had multiple chains of gelaterias or sorveterias. So they have Fredo, Munchies, Otra Vez, all sorts of things. And if that worked so well in Argentina, why had it never worked in Brazil? Wait, our timing was pretty perfect, we think, because we opened the first shop on the 12th of January 2011. People appeared, the word of mouth was amazing. I mean, within days, just huge queues. Every Saturday there was a queue out the door, around the corner.
Yeah.
It was
Nick,
more of a success than we could ever imagine.
if I may stop you there, then thanks
Sure.
for sharing this amazing journey. And I never get enough of listening to that story. We had this conversation several times, but what I'm really interested now is in, okay, so you guys, there were all this succession of events in your life that led you to, that culminated in the first store. And so the first store, the opening of the first store, how did you guys get the word out there? I mean, what was that beginning like, with so much skepticism, if you like, because you're sharing that, like you guys couldn't get your heads around why that wouldn't work in Brazil, or it hadn't worked in Brazil compared to Argentina. And both countries has, like, we have a huge amount of Italians as well, like the largest, I believe, community of Italians outside of Italy is in Sao Paulo or Brazil, right? So why and how did you guys went about launching the first store? Did you advertise at all? I mean, social media, what was the role that social media played at the time?
We didn't know very many people in Brazil. I mean, a few dozen people, but not a very large number of people. And so at the beginning, it was really a case of nurturing the people that you knew. So for instance, we opened in January, but the shop was actually ready 20th of December, something like that. So we actually did a soft opening for friends and family, and got feedback from friends who could say, I don't think that flavor will work, or maybe you should do this. Or so the final tweaking happened with the friends that we knew and people who'd heard about what we were trying to do. It was kind of a perfect storm, because it was around the time that iPhones were just getting popular. They weren't available in Brazil, but a lot of Brazilians traveled, so a lot of Paulistas, not a lot compared to today, but at the time there was a number of people that had smartphones and iPhones. It was about a couple of years into Instagram before it really got big. So our shop was beautiful, the product was colorful. So taking pictures and posting on Instagram was an amazing way of getting visibility. So I set up all the accounts for TripAdvisor, Foursquare, Yelp, Instagram, all of these digital platforms. Not that it would give us more visibility, but it would allow people to find us, and it would allow people to talk about us. And if we did a good job and offered a great product at a fair price in a nice environment, our idea was that it would sell itself. And that actually worked. I mean, at that time, a review on Foursquare was worth its weight in gold, because people would say they'd given it a report of their visit, the shop, product, the price, the staff. So the early adopters digitally, the early adopters to Instagram, the early adopters in Square, all helped give visibility and effectively free publicity. And the word of mouth, Brazilians are very empolgado. So if they like something and they think it's good, they'll tell lots of friends. So it didn't take long for the queues to go out the door. And in fact, then the problems became more practical problems, like we'd run out of milk in the middle of a Saturday afternoon because every pint of milk that we had in the shop got used. And we'd have to walk along Oscar Freire to the supermarket and come back with 60 litres of milk, walk in the shop with all these people in the queue, and they'd say, "Do you make it here?" As if it was coming from somewhere else. So a lot of people didn't even understand why they were there. They just went there because someone told them to, or because someone invited them. But our idea was that they'd be attracted by the space, by the decoration, by the lighting, by the trilha sonore, by the visibility, by the presentation. And effectively, by the time they put the gelato in their mouth, that was just the cherry on top. They were now absolutely convinced. And it worked. I mean, we spent a lot of time worrying and focusing on getting the shop as nice as we also could in Edu's experience and my experience. And we wanted to offer something that was like an escape to Italy for half an hour. That was...
And in that journey, Nick, I mean, because we have people here, we have Philip, for example, half American, half Brazilian, but lives in Czech Republic. I'm not sure if Philip is familiar with Bacha Gelato. Mauricio, for sure. Dominic in Canada. So Abby, who's in the US, New York, they are probably not so familiar with Bacha Gelato. You guys went from that one single store. You were producing the gelato within the store. Each store, as far as I recall, had its own mini factory, right? So you and today you have a factory, like a gelato factory, 185 points of sales. You're present in LA, in the US. So can you take us through that journey? There was a private equity firm at some point that that helped you guys scale, but initially I think the first 30 stores you did it with family and friends money, right? So I think that's very interesting also.
So we opened the first store in 2011, and on Oscar Freire, which is, to those of you who don't know, it's like the glamorously called the Rodeo Drive of Sao Paulo. It's what was one of the best retail addresses in Sao Paulo before shopping centers sort of diluted that fame. So we had a great location in a very dense populated city. We took an original product from Italy and did it as closely to the way it's done in Italy, with Italian machines that are imported, served in Italian display cabinets, which work because they've been proven 34,000 times. And our idea was to basically offer as good a gelato as we could possibly make to a market that didn't quite know it. So we opened our first shop. Obviously, we had all sorts of teething problems. We had to increase the electrical supply because we were consuming too much. And then we had to add more air conditioning because the shop was completely full. And then we needed to build a camera fria because the fridge wasn't big enough for the milk we needed. And meanwhile, we're also hiring staff. And I mean, anyone who works in knows that it's quite a difficult challenge to find the right person with the right presentation, with the right social skills for a specific job. Imagine how two foreigners who'd never run a business in Brazil did that. And then you get the learning experiences of things like the relógio de ponto to keep keep track of who's working at what time, and avoiding future lawsuits because you didn't give someone lunch, which wasn't true. It was actually that they wanted to burlar the system. So we had a lot of learning experiences in the first shop and decided that we'd have the first shop for a period of time to perfect the processes, perfect the product, perfect what we wanted to offer. So we're with one shop in Oscar Freire for the first year and a half. Then in the next probably nearly 2 years, then the second shop we opened was in Shopping JK, which was a brand new shopping center, very high end. And we were invited to go there by the Jerisacci group.
Yeah.
Shopping, yeah, Jerisacci, yeah.
Like it to me,
And
I think so.
And the debate with them, they would say, "Oh, we want you to come to the shopping center." So and we said, "Well, to be honest, we don't want to be in a shopping center. We want street locations because that's what our plan is." And they said, "No, you don't understand. People would pay millions to go to the shopping center." So we said, "Well, if people would pay millions, you should speak to those people who get millions from them, because we don't have millions. We don't really want to go to a shopping center." And the product mix manager from the shopping center kept and said, can we have some pictures? Because I need to take it to the committee. So we sent her some pictures and so on. And they came back and said, "Oh, here's a shop for you." And it was 4 meters wide. And we said to them, "Look, you have no idea. Our shop on a Saturday has a queue outdoor. The queue goes all the way in the shop to the cash desk, all the way back to the gelato counter, and it's totally unmanageable. There's no way we can fit our operation in a space like that." So in the end, we managed to negotiate a corner location, which was 6 times smaller than our Oscar Freire shop, but with the same rent. And we thought, well, this is never going to pay. We're going to have to write half the rent as marketing. But little did we know, in fact, shopping centers are a magnet for clients. And they've got parking, they've got security, they've got air conditioning, and they've got lots of other distractions. And in fact, the second shop was just as busy as the first shop in a fraction of the space. So then we started learning more about stocking and logistics and transferring and all the bureaucracies involved in that. Then we opened the third shop was about 2 years into the story. And I think by the end of the third year, we were up to 4 or 5 stores. The next one was in Bella Sintra and the next one in Villa Maddalena. And we'd done these tests because when we opened the first shop and we had queues out the door, we thought that we were very happy, but we also thought maybe we just got a one-hit wonder and it was just fashion, and all of a sudden people would just vanish. And we didn't know if it was maybe we got the right market for that specific region of the city. So when we opened shops, we tried to test different regions. Moema is a few kilometers, but a different profile of people. The shopping center, different proposta as well. And then the fourth shop was about 7 blocks from where our first shop was to see if there would be any cannibalization, and there wasn't. So the first 4 years was basically up to 5 shops, and then from the 4th year to about the 6th or 7th year, we got up to 30 points of sale. The original idea was to always produce on site on the day, and that in the first shops that always worked. Then we started getting opportunities to go to shop centers or airports or so on. And we started with a model which was in a Fiat Piaggio, which is an iconic three-wheel Italian little mini, like a tuk-tuk.
Right.
They were post-war, very small, very mobile, and we had them personalized in Italy and brought them here. And they were great for a period of time because they would allow rapid deployment. You could test markets in shopping centers, maybe you had some doubt. If they sold well, then you would upgrade to a shop. If they didn't sell well, you move them somewhere else. But in general, they all worked. So now we had two different models. We had a shop that produced gelato, and we had a small kiosk that needed gelato, which it usually got from a very close shop. And then, of course, you start running into, well, how do you guarantee the same quality? We had the same recipe and the same raw materials in every location. But you've got a different person operating the machine, and then you start having more issues about quality control and consistency and everything being completely aligned because the customer expects the same thing everywhere. So you have to all the processes to guarantee that happens. So after, I think, maybe 10 of these kiosks, we realized it was totally impossible. So we got a shop in Moema that was 400 square meters. 100 square meters was the shop. In the back of the shop was basically a mini factory to produce all of the gelato for all of the kiosks from one position, instead of having 10 different logistics problems from 10 different locations to 10 different kiosks, which was an absolute nightmare. Now you have all of the gelato produced for the kiosks in one specific location and then delivered to 10 kiosks. So that simplified things. Till there was more kiosks. So then we ended up having to build a factory in Kochia to do the production for the kiosks. So by the time we got to about 30 points of sale, which was about 6 or 7 years into the journey, by that time we'd covered quite a lot of ground. We'd figured out the processes, we'd figured out the product, we'd set all the everything was in motion. And around the same time, a Brazilian fund bought a share in another gelato company. That gave visibility, so a lot of people approached us about possibly investing, and we talked to all kinds of people. And after about a year, we decided to sell 30% of the company, and all of the capex, all of the money that came in was decided between us all that all of the money that came in was completely dedicated to expansion and capex and growth. They were a minority partner, but they wanted growth equity. They didn't want dividends. They wanted to make the company grow. And the previous money that we'd borrowed from in large from Eduardo and Gigi's dad would only allow to be paid back by the revenue of the existing stores, which was fine. And so that was about 7 years ago, and capital that went in 7 years ago was really the cat's jump, as they say in Brazilian, the Gelato, because it basically took an idea that had been proven with various models in various geographic regions, in various commercial situations, airports, shopping centers, street locations. So it had been proven that the product was accepted. It had been proven that there was demand. In fact, we've always had a lot more opportunities to expand than resources or people or cash or equipment or suppliers make it happen. So, and honestly, I think when we opened the first store, in our biggest dream, maybe one day we would get to 20, 30 shops. And that was dreaming as big as we could possibly imagine. Little did we know in Brazil, for anyone listening who's not in Brazil, Brazil's a very funny section. because on one hand, there's a lot of immigration that came from Europe. So there's a lot of European ideas, taste, style, etc. On the other hand, the Brazilian dream is the American dream. So this idea of brands and multi-shop is completely acceptable in Brazil. That wouldn't work. What we've done in Brazil wouldn't have worked in Italy, because Italians are questioning. They want to know you're the owner and you produce it and you're fully responsible. So it's an amazing product and it's completely artisan. In fact, in Brazil, you've got the perfect storm between consumers who trust brands, a very established model of shopping centers. There's, I think, 700 shopping centers in Brazil. We're present in some of the best ones in the country, with the highest flux of people, with the best brands around. So it's actually a huge market, and we had no idea how big it would be.
Hey, Nick, thank you.
Is that
we had
put you back on?
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. We have Rafa here. Rafa, you can fire away your question. He has to leave soon. It's part of our, we invite our members to jump in and to ask their questions. So go ahead, Rafa.
Cool. Thanks and congratulations, Nick. Very, very interesting to see all the history of the company and your professional experience as well. I am a customer. Every time that I am in Brazil, I go to your stores. It's really a very good product. No, I just want to ask you, what are your visions about digitalization? I see that you have an app today. How is your experience so far with loyalty program, CRM, and the mobile ordering process? Is this a thing for you? Is this important in your strategy or not?
It's certainly important. It became highly important during the pandemia. I mean, during the pandemia, I think we had 80 stores at that time in shopping centers. And so one day to the next, they were closed, and they were closed for a year and a half. So all of a sudden, your entire revenue stream, you're paying high rents to be in amazing locations, but nobody ever put a clause in a contract with a shopping center. What if no one is allowed to come in the shopping center? And shopping, I joke, shopping centers are a pact with the devil. You go to hell. The question's only when. So in fact, we still had to pay the rent. Maybe there was a tiny reduction, but it was a lion's share contract that the shopping center had. So you were still paying huge rent. So based on that, and at the same time, so the shopping centers were completely frozen. The stores were closed, but the costs are adding up. Meanwhile, the store locations on streets could operate, but people couldn't go inside. So all of a sudden, you have to develop a platform where people can order online, get a code, and it's contactless delivery. So basically, they turn up at the front door of the shop, they give a code, and that proves that they've paid and who they are, and they get handed a paper bag with the products inside. So it was a very sharp change to actually, because artisan gelato is not very digital. Transporting gelato in a tropical climate is not very easy, and it's not that obvious. So with this increased digitalization, for instance, nowadays our menus in the stores are on screens, because then you can actually start showing products efficiently. You can have more consistent pricing changes instead of printing 180 menus and having them shipped all around the country. So we've become a lot more digital. And the delivery, we went during the pandemic, obviously, delivery exploded for everyone. I think probably gelato was a little bit more of a luxury and less of a necessity, but it certainly was impacted. So we had a lot of sales with iFood, Rappi, etc. The people that do our front of our point of sale system integrated those, so the order would come in and go directly to the cash desk. So effectively, it's in. And that's become a lot more digital. And of course, as the company's grown, we've hired a lot more specialized people, a lot more qualified people, and there's departments of people involved in all sorts of things. I mean, I don't know how many followers we've got on Instagram today. It's hundreds of thousands. And so all of these areas now, I used to know pretty much everything that was going on. Today, as a partner, but not involved in the day-to-day, the office-going part of the business, I don't know half of the things that are happening, but I'm always surprised when more and more things are going on. But certainly it's the future, and certainly it can be improved significantly.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, for sure, for sure. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Awesome. I can also connect you guys later. Alexia, you have a question, so you're very welcome. Alexia, you're speaking from Romania. Is it?
Yeah, I'm from Romania. Actually, I'm from Brașov, which is like a mountain city, a tourist city in Romania, and we have a similar story with the gelateria here as well. They're like super small, like the space is super small, but like the queue is always like 30 minutes in the street, and we always wait 30 minutes to eat like super special ice cream. And I've been thinking the same thing as you mentioned. Why not expanding to other places? Why not going to the malls? But I don't know, maybe they're just not there yet. And well, first of all, let me congratulate you on your journey. It's like you rarely hear stories about people having like these amazing ideas and coming up with nice business plans from like working at the office 8 hours a day and being burned out. So I feel like your on hand experience with like everything has been super helpful here. My question here would be, so there were most probably moments when you realize that your experience and like your friends and your colleagues was not enough to tackle some I would say opportunities that you encounter, for example expanding into new places, or like digitalizing. How did you realize that you need more people on the team, and like what was your journey there? Did you try and do some things yourself, notice it doesn't really work, or how did that go from your experience?
I think thank you for the compliments. I think ever since day one, we've realized that this is much bigger than us. There's so many things we could do better. And we've basically been putting out fires from day one. And I joke that doing business in Brazil is like sailing a boat, but the boat's not very reliable. You don't have a chart, and you don't know what the weather's going to be. So every minute of every day, 20 hours a day, you're having to trim something. You've got to reduce the sail because things are getting complicated. You've got to slow down because there's rocks ahead. You've got to turn left because something went wrong. And both Ado and I have been super busy tackling as many problems as we can ourselves. And if we can't do it ourselves, we speak to people we know who might have some suggestions. And then we try to find the best solution for the specific problem at the viable price or cost, whether it's time or money or people or number of people. And I think in business, we're definitely not specialists, but you have to be open to trying to tackle the problem, to understanding the problem, to at least then be able to start finding a solution to the problem. But it's been pretty much non-stop, and involved in all sorts of things you never imagine.
Yeah, I can very much agree. Sometimes I feel like when you're under this whole lot of pressure, you like cannot see opportunities and find new things to think of, and you're just concentrating on the fires and putting out the fires. You kind of I feel like you probably tackled this really well because you had like the vision and everything after the fires were out.
No, but for instance, I love solving problems and discovering new things and imagining new things and making them happen. As Bacho got bigger and bigger and more successful and more structured, I said to my partner, I'm the minority partner, And I said to him, I said, Edu, I discovered in my degree in business studies, I didn't want to work in an office. I didn't want to have to schedule meetings all day, every day. It's not what I am. I prefer the blue ocean, the unknown, and figure it out on the way. So I asked if he'd be okay if I went off and did other things. I carry on being a partner. I'm available for anything I can help with. But I think honestly today, the people that are doing the construction of the lodge, the shops, are more professional, more qualified, and more experienced than I am in that specific area. Did I do it well? Yes. And did it very cheap because it was just me, my time. Whereas nowadays it's so big, and the expansion plan, I mean, we're growing at almost 25, 30% per year. So it's non-stop. So there's more architects, more engineers, more quotes, more designers, more branding, more decoration, more lighting. It's just an infinite number of things to be solved. So hopefully that answered half of your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really amazing everything you have done until now, and I'm definitely gonna follow you from now on.
There's other things. There's other things in the future. I'm doing a couple of other projects which are brand new projects, or not brand new, but recent.
We can talk.
We'll talk about them later.
Yeah, we have the final question, Rafa. One question, please, and then Nick, you can also declare your projects because you also need some support eventually, right? So that's why we have the community here. Rafa, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me fine?
Yeah.
Just had a bit of a technical problem here. Oh, okay, excellent, fantastic. Nick, I'm very honored to be here, and it's very nice to hear your story. And I know how it feels to be an entrepreneur in a completely different country, different culture, and I really respect that. That's really nice to hear. Very inspiring as well. And
thank you.
I wanted to hear, like, I don't know much about the ice cream gelato industry, but I just from what I hear is like a very competitive, very difficult market to grow. And we hear a lot of brands, they struggle as well, like even the ones that go into supermarkets. It's you know, how they keep up with the sales. So my question to you, what I would like to understand, maybe you can explain it to us, is how do you keep the brand fresh? Is it just a matter of just releasing new flavors every time, or is it a thing of how do you please the customers? How do you keep them coming back all the time? Is it the service? Is it the gelato itself? Is it the advertising and the marketing that you do around it? How does that work? How do you do this in your business?
Well, I think ultimately it comes down to the culture that we created. So first part of the question, the gelato market. For instance, in Italy, there's 36,000 gelato stores, but they're almost all owner operated, because Italy is not the country to do a big brand. It's not particularly capitalist in that sense. Maybe brands work for fashion in Italy, but for food and food and service in Italy, people are very personal, and they want real one-to-one relationships. So if you go to Milan and ask someone who's the best gelato, on the same block there'll be 4 different gelaterias, and it's like football teams. There'll be the supporters of Luigi, the supporters of Francesca, the supporters of Valeria, and they'll all fight to the death saying that's the best one. What we wanted to do, we realized that in Brazil there was an economic opportunity because the product wasn't available here. The climate and the taste seemed to offer a possibility. The way Brazil works with shopping centers, even though originally we weren't entirely sure if that was the way to go. And so we actually managed to create a brand and an identity. The people who worked for us, because we grew slowly at the beginning, we were able to input this culture of quality, of respect, of attention to detail. So there's little things that happen even today that I remember, and I'm still impacted. So when you buy a kilo of gelato, the girl you choose your flavors, she puts it in the pot, she puts it in the bag, she puts the seal on it, picks up the bag, walks out from behind the counter and gives it to your hand. And just that little gesture of Just that little gesture of getting closer to the customer and putting it in your hand. I'm still impacted by that, and I still think, wow, that is service. And it's challenging. Effectively, the staff we have are the same kind of staff that work in fast food restaurants. It's not a particularly high-paying salary. It's not particularly qualified, and so there's competition with fast food. So the time it takes to actually train the staff and let them understand the flavors and let them explain to the customers any doubts they have, that all is part of the culture. And I think once people get the culture and realize, wow, this company's actually looking after that, and they are respecting the customers, and they are inventing new ideas, and the customers keep coming, and the sales keep growing, and there's space for people to grow within this ecosystem. So hopefully that answers the question. If I've missed something, you can follow up.
No, I think that's it from what I understood. What you were saying is like there's a level of personalization that the people like it, like in the service. And
well, it's
like,
also
it's like, yeah, go ahead.
It's also what's the definition of luxury? I mean, luxury's all sorts of things. It's the quality of the product. It's the presentation in the vitrine. It's the way it's explained to you. It's the way it's served to you. It's the temperature of the space you're sitting in. It's the fact the lighting is 2,700 Kelvin, which is a nice warm lighting. It's not the blue morgue color. The decorations on the wall, the explanation of the products and the suppliers, and all of that, the sound system. If you put the wrong sound, there's half the customers aren't going to enjoy it. So it's very subtle. You have to have a sound that's nice ambient sound that's appealing, that's not monotonous, but doesn't exclude anyone. And then you go to the flavors. Every time you change, this is personal experience, every time you change a flavor, some people are very happy and some people are furious. The woman comes in crying and her son only eats mint choc chip and you took it away. So it's a very fine balance. So if we've got 22 flavors on display in the cabinet and we never changed anything, everyone would get bored. They'd say, oh, this is stagnant. I've tried them all. There's nothing new to come for. I'm never coming back. If you changed all 22, you'd have a rebellion because everyone has their favorite flavor. So in fact, what you have to do is have maybe 3 or 4 flavors that are seasonal that you change. And depending on the public consumption, you decide to change or not change a certain flavor. Because at least, for instance, we know pistachio is one of the favorite flavors. It's also one of the most expensive to make. But we know if we took pistachio away tomorrow, there would be an uprising. So it's definitely got to stay. We had mango sorbet, which was the most amazing flavor ever. If you're a European and you're used to eating unripe mangoes imported, when you try a mature mango in Brazil, it is heaven. It's the most amazing flavor. So we made this mango sorbet. If it was in Italy, it would be the #1 seller. But we're in Brazil, and what you discover is people say, well, no, when it's the season, there's so many mangoes, I get fed up with them. Mm-hmm. And truck drivers eat them for lunch because they fall on the street. So it's not fancy. Whereas pistachio from Sicily is fancy. Mm-hmm. And then you get other flavors, like people say, oh, well, why don't you have paçoca? Paçoca is which is like crunchy, sweet peanuts. Very Brazilian taste. Delicious. Not available anywhere else in the world except Brazil, I think. And someone said, why don't you make paçoca? So we made paçoca and it was a huge success. So taste is very personal, and we sort of have to adapt the flavors to the requests of people. One time I could put a Big Brother scenario on the flavor board so people could vote people out of the house and new ones into the house. I thought that would be the most dynamic way to hear what customers wanted. But technically it would be rather difficult to do in so many nations.
Right.
And that sounds like a very interesting idea. But yeah, I'm not going to take more of your time. It is great to hear you, Nick. And I'm also a customer. Like, I'm not in Brazil right now, but every time I'm in São Paulo, at least, I go to Bacho Gelato to try it out. And hopefully
We've
next time I
also
go to
got
Brazil,
6
I'd like
stores.
to meet you in person.
Absolutely. We've also got 6 stores in Los Angeles if you go there.
Sweet.
All right. I'm in Europe.
Nick, yeah, not yet in Europe.
Not in
Eventually,
Los
right,
Angeles
Nick?
often.
But Nick, we have to start wrapping this up. I mean, first off, as always, this has been an amazing session, and every time I listen to your story, I'm able to pick a detail that I probably missed. So what I like you to do is just to you're working on some special projects now in the coffee space, and which is still the food space, gin as well. So perhaps you can just tell us briefly some of your projects. The community is here for you. I can also introduce you to some of the people that we have offline if you need some support. But maybe just say what you're looking for in terms of support, the projects really quickly, and then we have to wrap this up.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the space. As I said, I got a little bit bored with being in a big corporation, so I started doing other projects. One of the projects is called Jardim Botanico Gin, which is a high-end London dry gin produced in an artisan scale in the center of Sao Paulo. So if maybe Carlos will put the link on the description or something afterwards. And that's basically world-class gin. 2 of the partners are perfume noses. It's an amazing product, as Carlos can tell you. And there's a speakeasy in Rua Nestor Pestana above Drosophila Bar, which is in a hip part of the center of Sao Paulo. So that's one project. And more recently, I got, as an adopted Brazilian, I find a bit sad that Brazil produces 35% of the green coffee beans in the world. And if you try to get an amazing cup of coffee in Sao Paulo, it's extremely difficult. And some of that's because best beans are sold abroad internationally and what's left over is in Brazil. Some of it's because historically in Brazil, coffee was very roasted, very bitter, very dark, and to compensate that, you had to put lots of sugar in it. So people got used to very bitter, dark coffee. And my idea is that actually with the advances in technology, there's some amazing roasters available now and very high quality beans in Brazil. And I want to do a very small, very precise, very high end coffee roaster. And I said to Carlos, well, it's the beginning. It's right at the beginning. Like Alexi said, where do you start? How do you solve the problem? So we don't even have the roaster. We've not really got the business. We've got a sort of pilot page on Instagram, which is socialbeans.cafe. And the idea is to do very good, very special coffee and sell it online, deliver to coffee lovers throughout Brazil who deserve a better quality product. So that's my elevator pitch. Anyone who thinks they can add some help to this story, I'd be most willing to sit down and help. And who knows, I can pay in coffee, gin, and gelato.
Yeah, and we are also looking for because I'm supporting you. However, I can, Nick, to get the gin into Europe or America or Asia, right? And eventually get support from our community as well to support you on this coffee endeavor. So, Nick, if our members, of course, they can always reach out. But what's the best way to find you and getting content for people who are not in the community? We are live on LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn, thanks to Carlos telling me that I had to be more visible. Personally, I don't actually like talking too much, and I prefer to be underseen and listen more. Carlos has always told me that community is what makes things happen, and I have to agree with him publicly that he was right and I was wrong. So Carlos helped me reinforce my LinkedIn presence. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm very happy to talk to people with interesting exchanges of ideas, because I think that's where everything starts, with the first word.
Mhm.
The Bacha di Latte, Jardim, and Social Beans Cafe, they're all on Instagram. That gives you a little bit more idea visually of what they're doing and they are. So you can find them there. And obviously through Carlos, anyone who wants to talk about something, or who has some suggestions, or who thinks I can help them, welcome to get in touch.
Awesome. And
Thank
also,
you for the invitation.
of course, Nick, you're most welcome always. Through our club as well, like we have our WhatsApp group where we are very careful about it. We moderate it. We moderate the group, but I'm very happy to introduce people to you, and the other way around as well. Nick, thank you so much for this. It was amazing once again.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't stop talking. There's probably a lot I could have said, but we'll have to figure out how to make that happen.
That was the whole purpose. So thanks, Nick. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
So we're
Bye-bye.
pausing